Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast today. I joined Josh Lloyd over on Locked On Fantasy Basketball to answer 6 big questions that will define the Knicks season.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. And there's something here on the Locked On Knicks feed every day, all summer long, or pretty much every day. If you want to become an everydayer, be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell to ensure you are Locked On Knicks on a daily basis. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite audio podcast platform of choice to ensure you never miss an episode on the go. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall. I've been covering the NBA for a decade now. That makes me feel really, really old. And today I'm joined by another vet, Josh Lloyd, or rather, I joined him over on Locked On Fantasy Basketball for his annual preview of every team in the league. We dive deep on the New York Knicks, 6 big questions on a bunch of different stuff. Mitchell Robinson, could he make or break the Knicks year? Will he ultimately need to be traded for the Knicks to hit their ceiling? OG Anunoby, why he could be another X factor on this team, and how can the Knicks compensate for the loss of Isaiah Hartenstein? We get into all that and much more right now with Josh here on Locked On Knicks.
So he's one of the hosts of the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin Schall is here. And when I asked him the best pizza place in New York, he did reference to me, like Michael Scott, that Sbarro's is just always a safe option to go to get those bits of pizza. You always know what you're going to get at Sbarro's, and it's high quality pizza. That's right, isn't it, Gavin?
It's about consistency at the end of the day, Josh. You have to go as far as, you know, you're joking, but I'm a vegan, so that really is the extent of my knowledge.
Oh, wow.
I might really say Sbarro's. Yeah.
So there you go. I think I've had Sbarro's once at like an airport when I was like delayed, and I was like, yeah, I don't know about this. So then we'll go to just when I was in New York, which was 5 years ago, or the last time I was in New York was 5 years ago. We had like one of the $1 slice places just around the corner, and that got smashed pretty hard. That was pretty good. Didn't care what was in it. $1 pizza slices at any time of the day, like breakfast pizza. Let's go. And that was my experience there. But no one cares. We're here to talk New York Knicks. We're here to talk about this team that obviously was really strong the second half of last season. They made a big splash, one of the biggest splashes in the NBA off season. They pushed some really strong performances in the playoffs. But I think also, Gavin, it's maybe a little bit, I don't know if underreported is there. I think we talk so much about the Knicks, but they were out in the second round. Like, we talk about the Thunder, man, how disappointing they were. The 1 seed, then knocked out in the second round. The Knicks were the 2 seed, and they lost in the second round. And we could talk reasons. There's plenty of reasons for that, but it happened. So, like, there is a lot of positive goodwill around this team. And one of the big things that I want to talk about with this squad is, like, we could talk about the positivity of the moves of Bridges, but, like, how much better do you think they actually got? Because they didn't just get Bridges without giving up anything else. Like, they had to, there is a slight, I think, potential change in identity, or at least a change in strengths and weaknesses. So, like, it's hard to quantify, but, like, how much better did they actually get?
I think they clearly have a higher ceiling now, and I think they're undeniably better. I do agree with you that I think people are overrating how much better they are. First of all, because to your point before, I think they were incredibly good last year, and there's a world where they might have been the second best team in the NBA if they stayed fully healthy. I think there was a definitive gap between the Celtics and everyone else, but the Knicks net rating, the 1 month they had Anunoby, Randall, and Jalen Brunson, was the best net rating any team put up for any month in the entire season, excluding the Celtics, who put up the same net rating twice. So their ceiling last year was as high as any team in the league, including the Celtics, at least in the regular season. I think in the playoffs, Boston, especially if Porzingis had been healthy, was a different animal. To address your question, though, I think Isaiah Hartenstein was an incredibly substantial loss. There's a reason one of the smartest organizations in the NBA decided to give him nearly $30 million a year and put it at a number that the Knicks obviously just couldn't reach. And I think Hartenstein wanted to be back in New York, but his hand was sort of forced with how much more money they were paying him. And it's going to look a little different because even though Hartenstein wasn't a shooter, he was just so intuitive about figuring out ways to create space, whether it was like little pin-in screens to seal a defender and create a corner three-pointer for Donte DiVincenzo, operating as a dribble handoff guy, operating as one of the best passing big men at the top of the key, like an explosive offensive rebounder. Like he just brought so much to your offense, while Mitchell Robinson is exceptionally elite at one thing on offense, and that is offensive rebounding. He's no longer elite, or at least he hasn't been the last 2 seasons at finishing, when at one point he was the NBA's record holder for field goal percentage in a year. And because of that, it changes the geometry of the floor for the Knicks. We're going to get into more, but it makes things much, much harder on Julius Randle. I still think the Knicks have an unbelievable amount of depth, particularly on the wing. I think they're going to be super versatile. I think they're going to be a great defense. I think Brunson is a bona fide top 5 to 7 player in the NBA at this point. They are really, really, really good. If they had kept Hartenstein, I would be extremely confident in their ability to compete for a title this year. But I think it is hard to overstate how big of a loss he was.
I think that's true. But let's talk about the positives. Let's talk about who arrived. So Mikal Bridges is the big one. They do bring in Cameron Payne for whatever reason, I'm not sure. Tyler Kolek in the second round of the draft. Keita Bates-Diop as part of the Bridges trade. And then Pacom Dadier, who was their first round pick. And this is going to be the one and only time that I talk about Dadier on this show. Gavin, over under 70.5 minutes total for the season for Dadier.
Oh, good question. I'm going to say under. I think
that's fair.
I think he plays mop-up duty maybe 10 times the whole year.
So he's going to get the Charlie Brown. He's going to get the Jacob Toppin, the Dwayne Washington, who was the other guy, Daquan Jeffries. The last 5 guys on the Knicks roster last season combined for about 100 minutes.
Gosh, it's a testament to how good you are at your job that you know those names.
Because I always would just look at that team and go, man, they're stacked. What is going on? And then people can criticize Tibbs for the minutes. I get it, but also, bro, what's going on at the back end of this roster? None of these guys don't make any sense, but this guy does make sense, and that is Mikal Bridges. He comes across. We don't have to talk about the value of the trade and the picks and all that sort of stuff. Bridges did not succeed as the number 1 option in Brooklyn, but he does not need to be the number 1 option here for the Knicks. So I guess the question to you, Gavin, on him, he is the biggest addition. That's the question that I ask people, who's the biggest addition coming in, and that's what he is. Is he low usage, 16 usage, high defense, high 64% 2-point percentage Phoenix Bridges? Is he closer to Brooklyn Bridges? Where does his role sort of fit on this team now?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the middle and probably a little bit closer to Phoenix Bridges. But the Knicks are, as we saw last year, when the Knicks finished the season with their 5 or maybe their 6 highest paid players all on the bench injured, there are going to be injuries. So there will be times where he has to be Nets Bridges or close to Nets Bridges. There will be bench minutes where he has to be Nets Bridges or close to Nets Bridges. But in the context of the starting lineup, I think he will be in a slightly elevated version of that role. But that's honestly kind of the role he was playing the year he was traded, where you saw him on the Suns start to have like these random 30-point games and like games where he took like 17, 18, 19, 20 shots. So I think it will be closer to that. And I think that's the way he was heading on the Suns regardless. But I think you're going to see, obviously, a lot of the efficiency come back, where during his time in Phoenix, like he was just flat out, like on top of being a great defender, like one of the more efficient, like 16, 17 point per game scorers in basketball. Like was incredible from 2-point range in years where he shot close to 70% from 2-point range, which you never ever see from a wing playing like 35 plus minutes per game on a great team. Like that was ridiculous. Was a 40% 3-point shooter. Like I think we get closer to that. And he does get a couple of possessions a game where like he gets to cook, like he gets to run the offense a little bit, because there were moments where that looked good in Brooklyn. Obviously overall was a failure, but it was also one of the hardest contexts to succeed in the NBA with essentially no help around him. And there's probably like 25 guys, maybe 30 who could have scored like 25 plus points per game. Or not even 25, 20 plus points per game on good efficiency in that context. So I think he's going to be fantastic. He's going to fit in pretty seamlessly. The only question I have about him in the starting lineup is how it looks with the shooting trade-off from him to Donte DiVincenzo, where he pushes DiVincenzo to the bench. And Bridges is a fantastic shooter. DiVincenzo is one of the 5 to 10 best shooters in the league. And can the Knicks survive like that spacing with Mitchell Robinson and for Hartenstein? That's kind of my big concern coming into the year, if you want to use the word big lightly.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like it's going to be a change versus what they were doing at the second. And there's one elephant in the room, which we are going to talk about later on in terms of how that all works together. But the Bridges stuff is interesting, because you're right. That 56 games that he played in Phoenix before he was traded, where his usage went from 15 the year before up to 19 in that season. But what did happen there is, we look at his efficiency, which was through the roof. His effective field goal percentage dropped down to 53 in that time, and he's almost the poster child for that. The negative correlation between usage and shooting percentages. The usage comes down, he's unbelievably efficient. The usage goes up, well, he can't really sustain that. And that was, again, pushed to the limit last season. So the efficiency will rise. I don't think he's got any shot of that bringing back to Phoenix usage unless he goes back to being a 15% usage player, which I don't think that's what exactly is going to happen. The key thing, I guess, again, for him is going to be what happens with some of the defensive numbers, and we can look at some of his defensive stuff, which has dropped, but it's not as big of a drop as I think we thought. Like, his steal percentage was great back in the 2020 season, but it's been at 1.6 to 1.4 in each of the last 4 years. So it's been very, very similar there. So he's a great addition. His role is going to be very different to in Brooklyn. He's going to be, an increase in efficiency, but probably not back to Phoenix. But, it's a very clear, player that in terms of what you traded out to get him, that player value is important. But the thing you brought up is interesting, and that's what that does for a Dante DiVincenzo, which we will get into in a second. But before we do that, I do have to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Schedules are packed. There's a certain NBA coach I know that's got a very, very broad range of interests, and he doesn't spend 35 hours a day looking at film, and he takes all that time for self-care, and you should be taking that time for self-care as well. That can be a key part of making sure the other things that you need to do, your responsibilities, the busy things, get done properly and shown the proper level of care. And one of the things you could do for self-care is therapy, and that's where BetterHelp can come in. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. You fill out a questionnaire, they match you up with a therapist to see who the best fit is. You meet with them. If it doesn't work out, hey, you can just choose to change to a new therapist at no charge, because getting that rapport is one of the key success things in therapy. So don't skip therapy day and get to BetterHelp. Go to betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Gavin, I've told this story on the show before, but I haven't told you this story. When I was in Vegas for Summer League, we were staying at a hotel with about 10 to 12 NBA teams, and they were all sort of stationed around the area of the hotel that we were staying in, so that I just saw them everywhere, right? So one night after I'd come back from Summer League, we'd gone out for dinner. We went to our little lobby bar in the hotel right near where our room was, and the elevators to go upstairs, and a bunch of Knicks people were down there, and old mate Tom Thibodeau was down there as well. So I'm lining up at the bar and getting a drink with my partner, and he's behind me with two other guys. It's a loud bar. And then I just hear, I hear one snippet of the conversation, and it's some guy, I don't know who it was, going, so, I went through the accent, but he's like, so, how do you approach late game timeout situations? And then Tibbs sort of just adjusts his shirt. So, all right, let's go. And just starts at 11 p.m. at night, just starts talking late game timeout situations in Vegas on a Saturday night. I go, bro, can you just have a drink and shut up?
Oh my God.
What are you doing? What are you, and at first, because I didn't actually know he was there behind me until I turned around and I went, of course. Of course this man is talking timeout strategy in a Vegas bar at 11 p.m. And I thought, you know what, that is just the perfect encapsulation of what this man is as a coach, for good and for bad. But what we do want to talk about now are the guys that have moved on from this team. And we've talked Isaiah Hartenstein, they had Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, who were trade deadline acquisitions and didn't really do a huge amount. Shake Milton, who didn't do a huge amount. Mamadi Diakite, who didn't do a huge amount. But yeah, so those guys, Bogdanovic, Burks, Milton, Diakite, are all part of that Bridges deal. The Hartenstein one, we have touched on that, and I don't want to harp significantly on Isaiah Hartenstein, because again, he's not a part of the team anymore, but it's more about what do we do now to replace him? Obviously, the oft-injured Mitchell Robinson will be in position to start, but now the options behind him, we're talking Precious Achiuwa, who was just re-signed, and Jericho Sims, and two-way guy Ariel Hukporti. It does change what this team does, because and I criticized Tibbs the season before for not recognizing that he could use Isaiah Hartenstein the same way that he used to use Joakim Noah, but he did start to do that this season. He started to realize, we can actually get our center to be involved in passing actions, but now he can't, because those guys that are remaining are terrible at that. They can't do any of that sort of thing. So the loss of Hartenstein you said already, it's a big deal. Like, how do they cover this? Like, what changes? Do they just morph more into perimeter stuff? Like, how do they fix this issue that, again, it's not an issue yet, but it looks like it might be?
Yeah, I think it's hard because it's further complicated by Julius Randle coming back, right? Because if there's a world where they traded Randle for something else, or for some reason he was still injured to start this year, and you open the season with Brunson, DiVincenzo, Bridges, and Anunoby as your starting lineup, I would say there's just enough versatility, enough shooting at your 1 through 4 that, like, all right, like the spacing is maybe not as optimal as it would have been with Hartenstein, but it's still like incredibly good for any team in the world. And with Randle back in there, I think he gets a little bit trickier. And that's not to crap on Randle, who's 2 seasons removed from like halfway through the year. He literally made more threes than anyone else in the NBA. So Randle's capable of shooting at volume, and he might have to come back to that. It's just a little bit of a shame because Randle, I thought, found a really good rhythm and identity after just a disastrous first 6 or 7 games last year. Yeah. Embracing, that was ugly, man. We were talking about trading him. But just embracing his inner bulldozer and just like destroying people. And that's ironically kind of how he got hurt, like getting flipped over by Jaime Jaquez, just attacking the basket. But he was destroying people, and he was so much better. Like you can look into the stats if you want the specifics, but with Hartenstein on the floor, then with Robinson on the floor, was Hartenstein just very intuitively, as I mentioned before, knew how to create just enough space that Randle could go down there and there wouldn't be a center parked in the lane. Mitchell Robinson, conversely, is about as rim-bound as any center in recent NBA history is. And I'm wondering if the Knicks, like over the summer, like obviously Mitch is never going to be in the same stratosphere as Hartenstein at that stuff, and they're not going to use him as a passer or a fulcrum. But I wonder if they made him work on just like, all right, screening off the ball and like being aware, hey, Dante's in the corner, go like set a screen on his guy, and just finding ways to get out of the lane and weaponizing just his size so that a center kind of has to be at least have like a cursory awareness of him being away from the rim, and that could open things up for Julius Randle. But I think that's going to be an uphill battle, and I'm wondering if the Knicks, at some point this year, we can get into it later, but I wonder if there's going to be a trade there. I wonder if Mitchell Robinson could be involved in a trade there, and they get someone who gives you a little bit more stylistic versatility. The in-house version, way to address that is to play small, which we know Tom Thibodeau, throughout the Obi Toppin era, famously opposed to playing that way. I wonder if he'll be a little bit more amenable if you replace Obi Toppin, who is a subpar defender and pretty much a non-existent rim protector, unless he's just like chasing and it's a help side block, with OG Anunoby, who for his size is a fantastic rim protector, 6'8", 7'2", 7'3" wingspan, obviously super strong and looked fantastic playing as a help side rim protector, but also as a primary guy on Joel Embiid at the tail end of that Game 4 against the Sixers. We've heard kind of like reports musings since that Thibodeau would have gone to that a little bit more if it weren't for the fact that Anunoby was hurt late in the season. They didn't get to really experiment with it, but I think playing small, getting your best 5 on the court with Brunson, DiVincenzo, Bridges, Anunoby, Randle would be the way to go. The only issue with that is it relies on Julius to do a lot of chasing defensively, that the Knicks in the playoffs, they had Precious Achiuwa to do that, and Achiuwa is up for that. So you can maximize your offensive ceiling by having Randle in there. Defensively, it might get a little dicey, not only because you're small at the rim, but it asks Julius Randle to run around, cover a lot of ground, help and double, and he is not particularly active on defense. So there are drawbacks either way, but to me, like if the Knicks are facing the Celtics, it's Game 7, and there's 8 minutes left in that game, like that is the lineup I'm rolling with down the stretch. I don't really see a world where you're playing Mitchell Robinson against Kristaps Porzingis, and the Knicks are able to win that series. Ideally, they'd get a center who could protect the rim and shoot threes. Those guys don't exactly grow on trees, so that's where the challenge is for the Knicks.
The interesting thing with this team is like Robinson's had some real success as an offensive rebounder, even in the playoffs, and as a guy that is that rim roller sort of player. Okay, so if you ask Mitchell Robinson if he can do other stuff, he's going to tell you, everyone's just been holding me back for years. But the other thing is, if he gets hurt, which seems to happen all the time with his lower body, like then you're cooked, because then you're running Precious Achiuwa, who I just don't think is very good, and you're running Jericho Sims, and that is just a bad combination, and that is where things start to become really dicey. But we're going to talk about the projected starting group now, which, again, I don't really think there's a debate here. Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Randle, and Robinson. There will be some people who are watching this or listening to it after the fact who will say, they'll just start Randle at center and we'll get Dante or Josh Hartenstein. There's almost zero chance that Tom Thibodeau does that. It's just not going to happen. And what I do want to focus a little bit on here is Jalen Brunson, because Brunson was obviously awesome last season. He was a guy that finished top 5 in the MVP. But one thing I think is maybe not mentioned is that at the start of the season, when Julius Randle was there, like pre-Christmas, he wasn't at the same level that he was in the second half of the season, especially when Randall was out, when his usage had to jump up. It did jump up at a huge level. And now we're in a situation where Bridges arrives, where Randall arrives back, and Anunoby plays a full season. So when we look at the totality of what Brunson did last season, especially his second half, his last 3 to 4 months, which is really the driving force behind his All-NBA and MVP nods, how does he maintain that? I don't think he can keep at that exact same level numbers-wise. Play-wise, sure. But I think he's going to have to pull that all back given the way this team currently looks.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and honestly, probably something we haven't talked about enough on the podcast this summer. And you just, Josh, I appreciate you just planning future episodes for me here when we need them in the dead of summer. Because I do think that's a conversation worth having. And the only pushback I have on that is he does just seem to be a second half player in some ways. Like the year before his first season on the Knicks, he was also just dramatically better. The second half of the year when Julius, obviously not in the playoffs, but at most of the tail end of the regular season, was healthy and was in the roster. I think the one thing to note is it's just so clearly his show now, even if he's going to be especially if Randall ends up, well, I guess the extent you wouldn't kick him this year, but even though he's not going to be the highest paid guy on the team, New York, it's not just his team. New York is his city at this point. So I think he will be given some amount of leeway to just sort of cook, for lack of a better term, and to do his thing, to have stretches where he's having 6 shots in 8 possessions and stuff. So I think he will have to scale it back a bit, though, because to your point, you have to get Bridges' shot. OG Anunoby, despite the new contract, I think he's still going to have aspirations of being a higher scoring guy. And that was part of his issue in Toronto. And the last time he played healthy for the Knicks, he looked fantastic, scoring basically 28 points in 2.5 quarters against the Indiana Pacers. Dante DiVincenzo is going to be playing less minutes when he's on the court. You better expect he's going to be shooting a 3 pretty much every minute or two he's on the floor. Josh Hart is going to have to get some offense. The Knicks have just so many mouths to feed. And it's kind of the one complicating factor of having this incredible depth and having this incredible team. How does everyone eat? And Jalen is not a quintessential 90s point guard, where he's just trying to feed everyone and just trying to set everyone up. He is obviously very much shoot first. And I'm wondering what kind of balance he's going to strike. To me, I think it's really big. Early in the year, we saw him add the 25-foot plus 3 to his game. And I'm hoping another year to work on that, because it sort of faded as the year went on. He has more of that, and he can get his points even more efficiently this year, taking more threes, continuing to hit them at a 40% rate. And in doing so is able to have a few less possessions where he's dicing people up, getting to the lane, shooting a floater, which obviously for him is a fantastic shot, because he's better at that than any player in the NBA. And yet you're going to want Mikal Bridges taking corner threes. You're going to OG Anunoby taking corner threes. You're going to have to give Julius enough possessions to keep him to keep him content, especially if that extension is not signed and he has money on the line. I think that ego, and also him knowing that he's playing for money that he passed up on his previous contract, that could be a factor, and chemistry could be a factor. So it's going to be a tough balancing act. I just think Brunson's always going to be the first to eat, so I'm not incredibly worried about it.
He is, I think. And what I'm going to put up on the screen, you won't be able to see this, Gavin, but I'm going to show the usage percentage of Jalen Brunson as the season goes on. And you can see, for those of you watching this on the video, you can see where it sits. It's around that 26 mark, 27 mark for most of the season. And then we hit January, and that's where it hits to 33, 34, 35. And his end of season number was 31.5%. But he was running at 35 usage for the final 2.5, 3 months of the season. And that's just not compared to being at 27 to begin the year, which was up from the year before. That number is, it's going to be really hard, I think, to maintain that level of usage. But I think that's an interesting graph to show when people think about Brunson and the value on his, fantasy numbers. We just got to consider what that team looked like second half of the season. We've got more stuff to talk about later on, because today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The summer, they've got offers for you, because we know that in the summer, it's not about all these leagues running. They slow down. That's what happens. They're going to come back soon, though, don't worry. But there's still stuff going on. Major League Baseball, the Olympics winding down at the moment. We're going to have the WNBA resuming. We're going to have college football not far away. NFL preseason is starting back, and FanDuel is going to cover you off, because they wanted to give you something through the summer. Every day, every customer gets one of two things, a boost or a bonus. That is every day for every customer. We get a boost or a bonus on FanDuel Sportsbook. So go ahead to FanDuel.com. Maybe you want to check out the odds of Jalen Brunson for MVP or the Knicks for the NBA title. That's going to be there as well. And you've got your boost and your bonuses that you can go and check that out with. So go to FanDuel.com right now and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel is an official Sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, so we looked at your projected starters there. Gavin, let's look at the projected bench group again. Very hard for me to have any arguments here with this at all. Juice McBride, Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, and Precious Achiuwa. Now, the narrative of the Knicks and the memory of the Knicks of people is Josh Hart playing 46 minutes a night and DiVincenzo, shooting the lights out and being second or third in total threes made. But again, at the beginning of the season when this team was healthy, before the trades, they were playing like 23 minutes a night, 26 minutes a night, and they're going to be back in these bench roles. Now, we can mix and match all this stuff, but if there's one thing that old mate Thomas Thibodeau loves, and he's going to pump minutes into those starters. So the role of these players, DiVincenzo and Hart in particular, it has to be lower than last season.
Yeah, I think to me, that's maybe my single biggest question coming into the year. Like, how are you going to give those guys the minutes that they deserve? And maybe even DiVincenzo more than Hart, because I think Hart's game can scale down okay. And not that DiVincenzo's can't, but he became just a completely different player than who he'd ever been, finishing third in the NBA and made threes last year. And that was because he was given that ultra green light that he's never, obviously Milwaukee didn't have that. Sacramento didn't have that. Golden State, he had it, but in a very finite role. Last year, he was empowered in a way he never has been. It's the same thing you're seeing in FIBA where Bogdanovich is torching, obviously always a good player, but he's torching Team USA and guys you would never expect him to torch. When guys are given more shots, when guys are having confidence pumped into them, they become very different players. And I think it's going to be very tricky with Dante for him not to lose that. And it's another reason why I think that small ball lineup, Josh, especially before there's a trade for another center, assuming there will be a trade for another center, it's so important to get that lineup on the court because it allows you to make sure that OG Anunoby can play 32 minutes and Dante DiVincenzo can still play close to 30 on any given day. And even someone like Deuce McBride, who was just for the most part, the couple bad games in Indiana, but fantastic for the Knicks throughout the playoffs. I had him in my projections at 13 minutes a game for this season. And that he's someone who on a good team probably should be playing 18 to 22. And he's just not going to get that in New York next year. And that's not even talking about Tyler Kolek, who Ian Begley referred to as the Knicks backup point guard. And I was all right, does that mean they're going to trade Deuce? Because right now there are no minutes for Kolek available. So I don't know what's going on there, but it is going to be tricky. Hard decisions are going to be made. To me, lineup creativity is a prerequisite. We saw Tom Thibodeau, I think, lean into that last year more than he ever had for someone who was always accustomed to just doing hardcore line changes and nothing else. He got better at staggering and having Julius Randle be the fulcrum of the bench unit, having OG Anunoby prop it up. The good news is the non-Brunson minutes, which in the past have killed the Knicks in the playoffs in particular. I'm really not concerned about that this year because they're just going to be able to load those lineups with DiVincenzo, with Bridges, with Randle, with Anunoby. Three of those four guys, you're going to have enough offense. You're going to have enough defense. So I think that's where the Knicks are going to be so strong this year. But I am a little bit concerned about scaling back Dante DiVincenzo, how that affects his game, how that affects his confidence. All right, guys, we are running a little bit long with Josh. So I decided to split this up into a part 1 and a part 2. We'll wrap things up on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.